Welcome to Science Unit 1, Lesson 8. In this lesson, students will be introduced to the final project and will get started in doing some science research. So in Activity 1, we'll introduce students to the project. And so what students need to do is, before they come to class, identify a possible topic for an informational brochure or a pamphlet that deals with some topic related to nutrition, diet, and health. And it might be good for them to generate more than one topic because as they talk about it, they're going to hone their ideas. So it might be useful to have more than one idea coming in. They also, by the end of this activity, need to understand the parameters of the final project. And so they will be writing on this prompt, which is, how does the scientific community communicate important information to a lay audience? After researching scientific articles, journals, and websites on important topics in nutrition, write an informational pamphlet in which you explain the issues, causes, problems, and possible solutions to the public. Support your position with evidence from the text. So students need to understand that prompt in the context of the larger project directions. So what do you need to know? Well, first, that students need to be able to generate a topic that can be debated. So it has to be something on which reasonable people could have differing opinions. And it needs to be focused enough to investigate for this assignment. So sometimes students will pick topics that are giant, that can't possibly be contained within one, 8-panel pamphlet. And sometimes they pick topics that there really aren't two sides to that issue. So they need to pick something that meets both of those criteria. And it's important to allow students time to rework their topic. So the better they can hone it before they get in there and start doing searches for articles, the better. So working in small groups, having time for discussion, kind of thinking about what would it take to present information about their topic will end up with better final products. So after students read and annotate the project directions, ask students to discuss their understanding of what they're being asked to do. So rather than reading the directions to them, have them read the directions, take notes on it, talk about it in small groups, and then share their understandings as a larger group. And also be sure to guide students to examine the grading rubric. So the rubric that's in there is how they'll be assessed on the project, and having that up front can allow students to work toward those goals. It's also important to show sample pamphlets. And by the way, the Lyme disease link that's in the PDF in the teacher's guide no longer works. It's a dead link. So this link below is a good replacement for that Lyme disease brochure, and I'll show it to you in a minute. But the other links still work fine. So as they look at the sample pamphlets, what they're going to do is students will work in small groups, and each group will look at one pamphlet in depth, and they're going to think about what makes a good pamphlet. So they're going to look at the elements of a pamphlet, the purposes of a pamphlet, the language, the way graphics are used, the way fonts and photos, how does it look, and how does that impact the effect of the pamphlet. And so there's some guiding questions in their academic notebook that they can use as they think through what makes a good pamphlet. It's also important for them to understand the role of a pamphlet as gray literature. And in the sciences, gray literature is important because it provides really recent information, 12 to 18 months old, and it's written in a language that's easily accessible. So it's precise yet simplified. And so it fills a really big niche or a really big role in science in making science understandable for the public. And that's really the role of what they're trying to do here. So they're trying to take complex issues and make them understandable. To be able to do that, they really need to understand it themselves. So here's that new Lyme disease pamphlet, and it's nice because it's in that same 8-panel format that they're going to be using for their own pamphlet. And by the way, as teachers have field tested this project, they've asked, well, is it important that they have it in print? Can they do it online? Well, absolutely. So we have directions in your lesson plans for how to do this pamphlet in the 8-fold format, or the 8-panel format, using Microsoft Word and Microsoft Publisher. But if you want students to do this in an online format as a web page or however, that's fantastic too. The point is to be able to get science to the public, to be able to describe some kind of important information that the public needs to know about diet and nutrition. Exactly how it's formatted is really less important here. In Activity 2, students are going to make a project planning timeline, and that is in their academic notebook. And so it asks them what they need to do, what resources they need to be able to get that part of the project done, and how they'll go about doing it. It also has them set interim deadlines. So when do I need to have this done by? What are my goals for each session as I sit down and work on this project? And it's important for teachers to help students make a realistic plan. So, if they tell you they're going to spend 5 hours in library and knock it out, well, that may or may not happen. So it's important to have them structure and think about each piece that they're going to need to get done, and to allow a little more time than they may think they need to have a realistic timeline. In their timeline, project planning timeline, there's a place for notes in there, and that's a good place for students to reflect on how it went. So here was my plan, and here's how I did. Using that kind of reflection can help them the next time they make a timeline to be a little bit more accurate. In Activity 3, we're going to have them start to read scientific articles on their own. And so we have a pamphlet, of course, that explains how to read a scientific article. So in Lesson 8, they're going to read and discuss Side 1 of the pamphlet on reading science articles, and then Side 2 will be used in Lesson 9. And so what do teachers need to know? It's important to break up the reading by section so that students really pay attention to each part of this informational pamphlet. And so what students will think about is, why do they read science articles at all? How did they decide what to read? How do they build a framework for reading? So in other words, in this pamphlet, it doesn't say start on line 1 and read to the end. It has them jump around where they read the introduction, then they go on to read the section headings, then they read the tables and graphs before they come back and read the prose. So it has a really nice framework for how to approach reading a science article, and as you're selecting articles, what you might want to skim and then what you might want to go deep into as you decide if this is an article that's appropriate for your research. They'll also talk about some important ideas of using current research, reading with skepticism, so being a skeptic of what you read, and then challenging assumptions as you read by looking at methods, conclusions, data analysis, statistics, so that they are reading as a skeptic every time they read. In Activity 4, they're actually going to have some library time. So what they need to do is use that time wisely to conduct searches for their sources for their project. And it may take them more than one trip to the library. Within the lesson plans, this is the only time that we've allotted as class time for the library. So when you get to the library with your students, talk once again about the credibility of sources and thinking about who wrote the article, why they wrote it, and whether or not it's appropriate to use today in the project that they're going to do. Also remind them to use the project directions and the write-up of their topic as they think about searching for articles, because sometimes when students get into the library, they get kind of overwhelmed by the amount of resources, and anything that's on their topic, they pick it. That's not really going to work. And so they need to think about, what are the parameters of the project, what is the angle that they're using on their topic, and then does this piece of research seem to fit those two needs? And it's important for you to provide time for the searches. So one full library period is what we've allotted, and it would be great if students could have the bulk of that time to really look at their sources. Somewhere halfway through, it's a good idea to pull students back together see how they're doing, what questions they have, what needs they have, so that they can make the most of that hour. If your library doesn't have great access to online journals, there's some free science article resources that are good. So the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences has some links out to other journals that you can access. North Carolina State University has some really good resources, as does Science Daily and Science Direct. So if your students are having trouble finding sources because of limited access to online journals, these are some good places where they can start as well. Most science journals will offer abstracts and some free articles, but a lot of times they're behind a paywall. So these are some good free resources that students can use. And that is Lesson 8.